Why coworkers secretly drugged our department's coffee for months to steal our code. When I caught him copying $200,000 worth of data, he was fired. But now his friend works at my new job, and suddenly my coworkers are complaining about feeling drowsy after lunch again. This isn't just a story about a bad coworker. This is about a betrayal so deep, so calculated, it ripped apart our company, our lives, and left me wondering if I'd ever trust anyone again. It started with just a little afternoon slump, but it ended with shattered careers and a chilling realization that the enemy was always closer than we thought. For 3 agonizing months, my cubicle mate, Derek, had been systematically poisoning our entire department, drugging our coffee, not just to mess with us, but to steal our deepest secrets, our ideas, our very livelihood, and then sell them off to our biggest competitors. And I only found out when I woke up, groggy and disoriented, to find him photographing my computer screen while I was literally passed out cold at my desk. Before that gut-wrenching moment, it all just felt normal. We'd all been feeling weirdly drowsy after lunch, like clockwork. Productivity would just tank around 2 p.m., people would nod off in meetings, and we'd joke about needing to switch coffee brands. Clearly, our office brew isn't cutting it anymore, we'd laugh. And Derek? He was the helpful one, always bringing fresh coffee from the kitchen, offering refills during those endless meetings, making sure everyone stayed caffeinated. We actually thought he was just being a good teammate, trying to fight our collective afternoon slump. The irony still makes my stomach churn. But then, the little things started to pile up. I'd wake from those strange micro-naps, and my handwritten notes would be in different positions. My computer screen would show documents I didn't remember opening. And the worst part? My password-protected files were being accessed. How? During times I was definitely unconscious at my desk. It sent a shiver down my spine, but I couldn't grasp what was really happening. The breaking point was a day I skipped coffee because of terrible acid reflux. I sat there, sipping my water, and watched in pure horror as my entire team slowly succumbed. It was like a coordinated sedation. Heads dropped onto desks one by one. And then, there was Derek, moving around with his phone out, photographing screens, flipping through notebooks. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pretended to fall asleep too, my eyes barely open, just slits. I watched him plug a USB drive into Sarah's computer, download her entire project folder, then move to Mark's desk and do the exact same thing. Methodically, systematically, stealing months of our research and development work. My hands were shaking, trembling, as I secretly recorded him on my phone, capturing him taking pictures of our whiteboard, where we'd literally mapped out our new software architecture. Then, he sat at my desk, trying to access my files. I saw his frustration when my password, which I'd changed that morning, thankfully blocked him. He must have been dosing the coffee with something that knocked us out for exactly 15 to 20 minutes because, right on schedule, people started stirring. Groggy, confused, complaining about the afternoon crash getting even worse. And Derek? He just sat back at his desk, looking concerned, even suggesting, with a straight face, that maybe we needed better ventilation. I took that shaky video straight to HR, but I knew I needed more. Solid proof. So, the very next day, I bought a substance testing kit. My hands were clammy as I secretly collected a sample of the coffee, right after Derek's morning rounds. My heart pounded like a drum as I waited for the results in the bathroom, praying I wasn't crazy. And then it hit me. The test came back positive. Zolpidem, a prescription sleeping medication, in doses high enough to cause short-term memory loss and extreme drowsiness, but not enough to be dangerous or raise immediate suspicions. Just enough to make us vulnerable. Confused. Easy targets. That evening, I stayed late, pretending to work, but my real mission was Derek's desk. I felt like a criminal myself, digging through his drawers, but the sickening truth pushed me on. I found business cards for a technical consulting company I'd never heard of. A quick Google search revealed the chilling truth. It was a shell company, a front, with direct connections to 3 of our biggest competitors. But the real shock, the one that made my blood run cold, was a hidden USB drive in his drawer. On it, a spreadsheet, a meticulously detailed list of every single major project our team had worked on, with dates of when he'd acquired the information, and amounts, from $5,000 to $50,000 per project. Over $200,000 in stolen intellectual property. My mind reeled. This wasn't just about some guy being a jerk. This was a professional, calculated heist. I called the police. I called our legal team. And the next morning, we set up a sting operation. We replaced the coffee with decaf. Security cameras were focused, hidden, on Derek as he made his rounds. We watched, breath held, as he was caught red-handed, dropping those crushed pills into the pot. When they arrested him at his desk, the look on his face was priceless. He tried to play innocent, actually tried to claim he was just trying to help everyone sleep better because we all complained about stress. Can you believe the audacity? But his laptop was a goldmine. Gigabytes of stolen data and communications with buyers, detailing offers for our proprietary code. The investigation that followed was a nightmare. It revealed he'd been planning this for over a year, specifically getting hired to infiltrate our department. He'd learned everyone's habits, their vulnerabilities, even dated someone from the department to learn about our security systems, all while maintaining this perfect persona of the helpful, friendly coworker. It was sickening. During the trial, it came out that he'd done this at 2 other tech companies, each time under a different identity. The prosecutors found undeniable evidence he was part of a much larger corporate espionage ring. And despite being offered a plea deal, Derek refused to name his contacts. He never gave them up. The fallout for us was devastating. Our company had to notify all our clients about the potential breach. We lost 3 major contracts. Half the team quit within 6 months, unable to shake that profound feeling of violation. The knowledge that we'd been drugged, robbed, by someone we'd trusted implicitly. Derek got 8 years for corporate espionage and assault with a controlled substance. But the damage? It was done. Even now, 2 years later, I can't drink office coffee without remembering those afternoons of lost time, without feeling that chilling dread. And I still wonder who else might be out there, planning the same thing. But the worst part? Last week, I got a LinkedIn request from someone named Eric, and he looked oddly familiar. My blood ran cold when I dug deeper, finding an old photo from Derek's trial. There, partially visible in the background, was an associate, and the resemblance to Eric was uncanny. They were still out there, still hunting. I couldn't prove anything yet, but that chilling realization hit me like a physical blow. And then, the new whispers started in my new office. My new coworkers, complaining about feeling tired after lunch. That familiar, insidious pattern. I knew, with a gut-wrenching certainty, I had to act. Fast, but carefully. Eric had accepted my LinkedIn connection. His profile showed he'd just started at my new company 3 weeks ago, in business development, 2 floors up from my engineering department. My stomach churned as I scrolled through his work history. All legitimate-looking companies, glowing recommendations, but the dates, they were suspicious. Never staying anywhere longer than 18 months. The very next morning, I skipped the elevator, took the stairs, and as I passed the second-floor break room, I heard it. Voices, and the familiar, terrifying sound of the coffee machine brewing. My hands trembled slightly. A vivid, unwelcome memory of Derek's routine. Always the first one in. Always so eager to help with the morning coffee run. I forced myself to my desk, but I couldn't shake the feeling. History was about to repeat itself. During our morning stand-up meeting, my manager actually announced it. Eric would be joining some of our cross-department sessions to better understand our technical processes for potential client presentations. Everyone nodded, appreciative, commenting on how proactive the business development team was being. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, every single alarm bell I had was ringing, screaming. Over the next few days, I watched my coworkers with a hypervigilance that was exhausting. Tom, from back-end development, mentioned feeling unusually tired after lunch. Sandra complained about brain fog during afternoon code reviews. The QA team joked about needing stronger coffee. It was so subtle, just like before. Just enough to seem like normal workplace fatigue. But I knew better. I knew. I started bringing my own coffee in a thermos. Claimed I'd developed a taste for some special blend from home. When Eric appeared on our floor during lunch, chatting, learning names, asking about projects with that same practiced, friendly interest Derek had shown, I made sure to grip my thermos tightly. He noticed, gave me a curious look, but I just smiled, took another sip of my safe, untampered coffee, and watched him. The patterns were almost identical. He'd appear during coffee breaks, offering to grab refills. Volunteered to help with the afternoon snack run. He even brought in homemade cookies one day, watching carefully as people ate them. I politely declined, citing a new diet, and saw his jaw tighten slightly before he recovered with that too perfect, understanding smile. Then, my coworker Lisa was the first to have a serious incident. She passed out completely during a design review, just slumped forward onto the conference table. Everyone rushed to help, assuming she'd fainted from skipping breakfast. But I saw Eric in the doorway, observing, with an expression that wasn't quite concerned enough. When Lisa came to, she couldn't remember the last 20 minutes of the meeting. The dread in my stomach solidified into cold, hard resolve. That night, I stayed late again. But this time, I wasn't searching desks. I was installing a small security camera I'd bought with my own money, positioning it to capture the break room coffee station. I knew it was probably illegal, definitely against company policy, but I couldn't go through proper channels yet. Not without absolute, undeniable proof. Not when everyone would just think I was paranoid, traumatized by what happened before. The next morning, I arrived extra early, before even the cleaning crew had finished. My hands were shaking as I retrieved my camera. My heart sank as I reviewed the footage on my laptop. There it was. Eric, at 6:47 a.m., looking around carefully, pulling something from his pocket, and adding it to the coffee grounds. The video quality wasn't great, but it was clear enough. He was doctoring the coffee. I saved multiple copies, to different drives, to cloud services, my fingers fumbling with the keyboard. But I knew I needed more. I needed to catch him with whatever he was using. I needed to document the thefts that would surely follow. Most importantly, I needed allies. People who would believe me before the entire team was compromised. I decided to start with Robert from IT security. He was new, hired specifically after the Derek incident to beef up our internal protections. I found him in his office, surrounded by monitors showing various network statistics. When I closed the door behind me and asked if we could talk confidentially, his expression grew serious. I showed him the video, and I watched his face, the skepticism melting away, replaced by genuine concern. He asked to see it again, then pulled up Eric's employee file on his screen. Together, we found some interesting discrepancies. The previous company Eric listed had gone out of business 6 months ago, making reference checks impossible. His technical certifications seemed legitimate, but the institutions had surprisingly sparse online presence. Robert, thankfully, agreed to help me investigate quietly. He set up network monitoring on Eric's computer usage and gave me a special flash drive that would capture any USB activity on the computers in our department. We agreed to give it 1 week. 1 week to gather undeniable evidence before going to upper management. The hardest part, the agonizing part, was watching my teammates slowly succumb to the same pattern I'd lived through before. The afternoon drowsiness grew worse. People started making unusual mistakes in their code. Tom left his computer unlocked twice. Tom. He'd never done that in the 3 years I'd known him. Sandra's innovative algorithm design, something she hadn't even finished, showed up in Eric's presentation to potential clients, even though she had no memory of sharing it with him. I documented everything, meticulously. Times, dates, who was affected, what information might have been compromised. I took photos of the coffee area each morning, before and after Eric's visits. I tracked when people took breaks and when incidents occurred. My notebook filled with evidence. But I needed something more concrete. I needed the smoking gun. The breakthrough came when I decided to follow Eric after work. I kept my distance as he took the subway to a different part of town, eventually entering a small, unassuming office building. I waited across the street, pretending to browse my phone, until he emerged an hour later with a small paper bag. My pulse quickened. I recognized the building. It housed several medical offices, including a psychiatric practice. Interesting. The very next day, I arrived at work to find utter chaos. Someone had tried to access our source code repository with Tom's credentials at 3 a.m., triggering all our new security protocols. Tom swore he'd been home asleep. His key card confirmed he'd left the building at 6 p.m. But the access attempt? It had come from inside the building, from Tom's own computer. Robert pulled me aside during the commotion, his face grim. His network monitoring had caught something. Eric's computer had been accessing unusual ports, trying to establish connections to external servers. More importantly, he'd found traces of a key logger being deployed through email attachments Eric had sent to various team members, all disguised as business development surveys. We finally had enough to act. But I wanted one more piece. The final, irrefutable evidence. That afternoon, I saw Eric heading to the break room, radiating his usual helpful demeanor. I followed. I watched him prepare the coffee, waited until he added his special ingredient, then walked in, casually. Just as he was stirring the pot, he startled slightly, but recovered instantly, offering me a fresh cup with that practiced smile. I accepted it gratefully, pretended to remember something, set it down, and excused myself. The second I was out of sight, I circled back, heart pounding, and carefully poured some of the coffee into a sample container I'd been carrying. The substance test kit I bought. It showed the exact same result as before. Zolpidem. In those same, carefully measured doses. Combined with the video evidence, the network logs, and the horrifying testimony I could provide about Derek's similar methods. We finally had enough. Robert and I presented everything to the head of security and the legal department that afternoon. Their faces grew increasingly grim as we laid out the unassailable evidence. The head of security immediately called for Eric to be escorted to a conference room, while legal began making urgent phone calls. I watched from the window as security approached Eric's desk. For a split second, his mask slipped. I saw the pure, cold calculation in his eyes as he weighed his options. But surrounded by security personnel, he had no choice. He complied. As they led him past our floor, our eyes met briefly. His expression was utterly cold. Nothing like the friendly colleague persona he'd worn for weeks. The police arrived within the hour. I gave my statement, providing all the evidence we'd collected. The detective, looking tired but thorough, asked detailed questions about the connection to Derek and the previous incident. She assured me they would investigate that connection thoroughly. As the day wound down, and the office slowly, uneasily, returned to a semblance of normal, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. My teammates were confused and shaken, especially those who'd been affected by the drugging. Lisa was particularly upset, the realization that her recent memory lapses weren't just stress, as she'd assumed, hitting her hard. Our manager called an emergency meeting, explaining what had happened in broad strokes, carefully navigating the legal details. The company would be providing counseling services. They were implementing new security measures, restricted access to break rooms, mandatory security training for all employees. I stayed late again that night, but this time, it was to help Robert secure our systems and check for any other vulnerabilities Eric might have exploited. As we worked, he thanked me for trusting him with my suspicions. He admitted he might have dismissed them if I hadn't had such compelling evidence from the very start. The next few days were a blur of police interviews, security audits, and team meetings. We learned that Eric had indeed been connected to Derek. They'd been part of the same corporate espionage ring, though Eric, of course, claimed he was working independently. The police found similar substances in his apartment, along with USB drives containing stolen data from our company and, horrifyingly, possibly others. Human Resources worked overtime to verify all recent hires, and several other companies in our industry were alerted to check their own employees. The scope of the ring Derek and Eric were part of was far larger than anyone had initially realized. And still, both men continued to refuse to name others involved. My teammates slowly, painstakingly, began to trust the office coffee again, though many brought their own for weeks afterward, a lingering shadow of suspicion. The company installed security cameras in all common areas and implemented a policy where no single person could handle food or drinks for the entire team. It felt like overkill to some, a dramatic overreaction, but those of us who'd lived through it twice, we understood the absolute, chilling necessity. 3 weeks later, those sufficient security measures suddenly felt woefully inadequate. A familiar, sickening pattern emerged. Our newest junior developer, someone hired just before Eric's arrest, started exhibiting behaviors that made my skin crawl. She always arrived early, always offered to make the morning coffee run, always seemed particularly interested in our project timelines. My stomach tightened with a sickening dread. I watched her every movement, carefully documenting each interaction in a new notebook I kept locked in my desk drawer. Robert noticed my increased vigilance. One afternoon, he pulled me into his office. He showed me the enhanced monitoring systems he'd implemented, explaining how any unusual network activity would trigger immediate alerts. We'd also installed tamper-proof locks on the break room, requiring key card access, with cameras recording every single entry. The company had even hired a security consultant to conduct random sweeps for hidden devices or unauthorized access points. But my paranoia still reached new, terrifying heights. I discovered my desk drawer had been disturbed. The notebook was still there, but pages had slight creases I hadn't made. They'd been photographed. I immediately changed all my passwords. And from then on, I started keeping all my sensitive documentation in a safety deposit box at the bank down the street. During lunch, I'd walk there to update my records, always checking for anyone following me. The junior developer's name was Victoria, and she seemed genuinely enthusiastic about the work. Too enthusiastic. She volunteered for overtime, stayed late to help with projects she wasn't even assigned to, and always managed to be around when sensitive discussions happened. I decided to test her. I left false information on a sticky note on my monitor, something about a new, fictional algorithm we were developing. 2 days later, my heart sank. I overheard her mentioning details about this made-up project to someone on the phone. I brought my concerns to Robert, but he urged caution. We couldn't accuse every new employee based on suspicion alone. The company was already facing lawsuits from the previous incidents, and false accusations could destroy what little remained of our reputation. He suggested we implement a honeypot strategy instead, creating fake projects with trackable data, designed to see if any information leaked. The plan worked. Better than expected. Within a week, elements from our fake project appeared in a competitor's patent filing. The data itself was meaningless, but it contained specific markers we'd embedded that made it traceable directly back to our honeypot. Robert traced the access logs and found Victoria had downloaded the files using Tom's credentials while he was out sick. We confronted her in a conference room with HR present. She broke down immediately, sobbing, admitting she'd been recruited online by someone offering $10,000 for any innovative code or algorithms. She claimed she didn't know about Derek or Eric, thought it was just a one-time opportunity to pay off her student loans. The person who recruited her used encrypted messaging apps and cryptocurrency payments, making them nearly impossible to trace. Victoria was terminated immediately, and we filed yet another police report. The detective assigned to our case, the same tired woman from before, seemed unsurprised. She explained that corporate espionage rings often recruited desperate young professionals through online job boards and coding forums. They'd cast wide nets, hoping to find employees willing to steal for quick cash. The relentless stress was affecting everyone. Tom developed insomnia and started making careless mistakes. Sandra requested a transfer to another department. Lisa quit entirely, taking a job at a nonprofit where she felt the stakes were lower. Our team was hemorrhaging talent. Productivity plummeted as everyone spent more time watching their backs than writing code. Management, finally realizing the depth of our collective trauma, brought in a crisis counselor. We sat in a circle in the large conference room, sharing our raw feelings about the betrayals. It was cathartic, but also terrifying to hear how deeply everyone had been affected. The counselor emphasized the importance of rebuilding trust, yes, but also maintaining a healthy skepticism. She taught us techniques for managing anxiety, for recognizing the subtle signs of manipulation. I, personally, started seeing a therapist privately, trying desperately to process the suffocating paranoia that had completely taken over my life. She helped me understand that my hypervigilance, while absolutely exhausting, had saved my team twice. We worked on finding a balance between reasonable caution and debilitating suspicion. I had to learn to compartmentalize my fears, to simply function despite the constant, gnawing worry that another spy might be among us. Meanwhile, Robert had been diving deep into the dark web, trying to understand how these insidious recruitment networks operated. What he found was chilling. Forums where corporate secrets were bought and sold like commodities. Our company's name appeared frequently, marked as a high-value target due to our innovative work in machine learning and data processing. The prices for our code ranged from thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on the project. We implemented even stricter security protocols. All code was now encrypted and stored on air-gapped systems, completely cut off from external networks. Developers could only access what they needed for their specific tasks. We instituted pair programming, ensuring no one worked alone on sensitive projects. And the coffee machines? They were replaced with individual serving pods that literally couldn't be tampered with in bulk. The measures felt extreme, like we were turning our office into a bunker. But they were, undeniably, necessary. Other tech companies in our area had started reporting similar incidents. The local FBI field office opened an investigation into what appeared to be a coordinated campaign targeting the region's tech sector. They interviewed all of us, multiple times, meticulously building profiles of the perpetrators and their methods. During one of these interviews, the agent mentioned something that chilled me to the bone. They'd found evidence suggesting Derek and Eric were just low-level operatives in a much larger organization. The real orchestrators remained hidden, using disposable assets like Victoria to maintain distance from the actual crimes. The agent warned us, gravely, to remain vigilant. The organization would likely attempt to infiltrate our company again. That warning became my new obsession. I started researching corporate espionage countermeasures relentlessly. I read books by former intelligence officers, studied case files from similar incidents, and attended security conferences on weekends. My apartment became a fortress of locks, cameras, and alarm systems. Friends stopped visiting, put off by the security screening I insisted on before letting anyone inside. Work became a careful, exhausting dance of productivity and protection. Every new hire was scrutinized intensely. Background checks went back a decade. References were verified through multiple sources. Social media histories were analyzed by algorithms, looking for any connections to previous perpetrators. The hiring process took 3 times longer than before, but management considered it a necessary evil. 6 months after Victoria's termination, we actually thought we'd finally achieved stability. The remaining team had bonded through shared adversity. We developed our own internal language and signals, subtle ways to verify each other's identity and intentions. The security measures had become routine, integrated seamlessly into our workflow. We were safe, or so we thought. Then, Robert discovered something deeply troubling in the network logs. Someone had been accessing our systems, using sophisticated spoofing techniques, making it appear as if the connections came from authorized devices. The intrusions were brief, just seconds, but they occurred with increasing, terrifying frequency. Whoever was behind them was testing our defenses, probing for weaknesses. We spent sleepless nights, fueled by caffeine and pure anxiety, trying to trace the source. Robert brought in additional IT security specialists, experts in cyber warfare and intrusion detection. They set up honey traps throughout our network, fake vulnerabilities designed to lure the intruder into revealing themselves. It was a cat-and-mouse game that went on for weeks, with neither side gaining a clear advantage. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Our office cleaning service had recently changed companies, and I'd noticed one of the new janitors. He was paying unusual attention to our work areas. Always seemed to be cleaning near occupied desks, lingering longer than necessary. I mentioned this to Robert, and he immediately pulled the security footage. What we found was subtle, but utterly damning. The janitor had been placing tiny, almost invisible devices under desks, near network ports. They were sophisticated keyloggers and network sniffers. You wouldn't see them unless you knew exactly what to look for. We traced his employment back to a staffing agency that, upon investigation, turned out to be nothing but a shell company, registered just 2 months before they got our contract. This time, we didn't confront him directly. Robert and I worked with building security to set up a sting operation. We planted false information about a major product launch, complete with fake code repositories and fabricated documentation. We made sure the janitor would be cleaning our area when this information was clearly visible on our screens. The trap worked perfectly. That night, the network sniffers activated, attempting to download our fake data. Robert traced the transmission to a server farm overseas. But more importantly, we had clear evidence of the janitor's involvement. Security detained him the next morning when he arrived for his shift. His real name wasn't on any employment records. He carried multiple fake IDs and refused to speak without a lawyer. The police found an apartment he'd been renting under another false name, filled with surveillance equipment and detailed notes about our company's operations. He'd been watching us for months, learning our patterns, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. The investigation revealed he was connected to the same insidious network that had employed Derek and Eric. They'd evolved their tactics, now using service companies as cover to gain physical access to target buildings. That cleaning company had contracts with dozens of tech firms in the area, giving them unprecedented access to sensitive facilities. Our company immediately severed ties with the cleaning service and brought in a new, vetted team with military-grade security clearances. Every service provider, from maintenance to food delivery, underwent extensive background checks. We installed additional cameras, covering every inch of the office, with feeds monitored by a dedicated security team. The psychological toll on our team was immense. People jumped at shadows, questioned every interaction, and struggled desperately to focus on actual work. Several more employees resigned, simply unable to handle the constant, suffocating stress. Those who remained formed an even tighter unit, bound by shared trauma and a fierce determination to protect what we'd built. I found myself becoming the unofficial security liaison for our department. My experience with Derek and Eric had made me hyper-aware of potential threats, and my colleagues started to rely on my instincts. I conducted informal training sessions, teaching them to recognize social engineering tactics and suspicious behaviors. We developed code words and emergency protocols, effectively turning our workplace into something resembling a covert operations center. The company's leadership finally acknowledged that half measures weren't enough. They hired a former NSA contractor, a force of nature, to overhaul our entire security infrastructure. She implemented zero-trust architecture, where every single access request was verified multiple times. Biometric scanners replaced keycards. All communications were encrypted end-to-end. Our office began to feel more like a fortress than a creative workspace. Despite the oppressive security, we somehow managed to continue our development work. The projects that had attracted so much unwanted attention were nearing completion. We'd created groundbreaking algorithms for data analysis and pattern recognition, innovations that truly could revolutionize multiple industries. The bitter irony wasn't lost on us. Our work on security and encryption had advanced significantly because of necessity. Robert and I maintained our partnership, meeting daily to review security logs and discuss potential vulnerabilities. He'd become as paranoid as I was, perhaps more so. His office was a bunker of monitors and detection equipment, constantly scanning for threats. He rarely left the building during work hours, terrified that any lapse in vigilance could lead to another catastrophic breach. One afternoon, while reviewing security footage from the previous week, Robert and I noticed something odd. A delivery driver had spent an unusually long time in the lobby, appearing to text on his phone while waiting for a signature. The angle of his phone suggested he might have been taking photos of our entire security setup. When we tried to trace the delivery, we found it had been scheduled for a company on a different floor. We alerted building security, but the driver was long gone. The delivery company had no record of him in their system. Another ghost. Another potential threat. We immediately added delivery personnel to our watch list, requiring all packages to be screened at a separate facility before entering the building. The measures felt extreme, like something out of a spy movie, but experience had taught us that paranoia was, infuriatingly, often justified. The fake janitor's arrest had made local news, bringing a torrent of unwanted attention to our company. Reporters called constantly, wanting to know about this corporate espionage ring targeting tech companies. Management issued carefully worded statements, while legal worked overtime to prevent any more sensitive information from becoming public. The last thing we needed was to advertise our vulnerabilities to other potential threats. I started receiving strange LinkedIn messages, profiles that seemed legitimate but felt off. They asked probing questions about our work, offered collaboration opportunities that seemed too good to be true, or claimed to be researchers working on similar projects. I reported each one to Robert, who traced several back to IP addresses associated with previous incidents. The stress began affecting my health in profound ways. I developed chronic headaches, struggled with insomnia. My doctor prescribed anxiety medication, but I was terrified to take it, worried it might dull my senses when I needed them sharper than ever. I compromised by taking half doses, just enough to take the edge off without compromising my vigilance. Our team meetings had transformed. They were now security briefings, with actual work discussions squeezed in between. We reviewed suspicious incidents, updated threat assessments, and reinforced protocols. New employees underwent extensive orientation focused primarily on security awareness. The once vibrant, creative, collaborative atmosphere that had defined our workplace had been replaced by something closer to a military operation. 3 months after the janitor incident, we faced a new kind of challenge. A venture capital firm expressed interest in investing in our company, wanting to fund the expansion of our revolutionary algorithms. Due diligence. It required opening our books and operations to external scrutiny, something that absolutely terrified those of us who'd lived through multiple infiltration attempts. Management hired a specialized firm to vet the investors, investigating their backgrounds and connections. The process took weeks, with forensic accountants and security experts examining every aspect of the firm's operations. They found no obvious red flags, but we'd learned, painfully, that absence of evidence wasn't evidence of absence. The investment meetings were held off-site, at a secure location. Our legal team had drafted unprecedented non-disclosure agreements, with severe penalties for any breach. The venture capitalists balked at some of the terms, calling them paranoid and excessive. They had no idea what we'd been through, the true, soul-crushing price we'd paid for trust. I attended one of these meetings as a technical advisor, explaining our innovations while carefully, meticulously avoiding any details that could be exploited. The investors seemed genuine, asking intelligent questions and showing appropriate enthusiasm. But I couldn't shake the chilling feeling that we were exposing ourselves to new vulnerabilities, opening doors we'd worked so desperately hard to close. Robert had installed monitoring equipment in the meeting room, with the investors' consent. He analyzed their devices for any suspicious software or connections. Everything came back clean, but we both knew that meant little. The most sophisticated attacks were always the ones you never saw coming. As negotiations progressed, we implemented additional safeguards. Code demonstrations were conducted on isolated systems with no connection to our main network. Financial discussions happened through encrypted channels with multiple authentication steps. Every interaction was documented and analyzed for potential security implications. The paranoia had become institutionalized, built into every process, every procedure. New employees often struggled to adapt, finding the constant vigilance utterly exhausting. We lost good people, brilliant people, who simply couldn't handle the pressure. Those who remained became increasingly isolated from the normal tech community. Our reputation had shifted, from an innovative startup to a paranoid fortress. I sometimes wondered if we were winning or losing. We'd stopped multiple infiltration attempts, protected our intellectual property, but at what cost? The constant stress was wearing everyone down. The creative spark that had driven our innovations was being smothered by security concerns. We were safe, yes, but diminished. Late one evening, while working alone in the office, I heard footsteps in the hallway. My heart rate spiked, a sickening jolt, as I recognized the pattern. Too deliberate, too careful. I activated the silent alarm on my phone and positioned myself with a clear view of the door. The footsteps paused outside my office. I held my breath, every muscle tense. The door opened, and it was just one of our security guards, doing his rounds. He apologized for startling me, but I could see the concern in his eyes. I'd become the person who jumped at shadows, who saw threats in every corner. The very vigilance that had saved us was slowly, agonizingly, destroying me. Robert found me there an hour later, still shaking from the adrenaline. He sat beside me in silence for a while before finally speaking. He'd been thinking about leaving, finding a job somewhere with less history, less paranoia. The constant state of alert was unsustainable. We were burning out. All of us, fighting a war that might never end. I understood his feelings completely, but I couldn't imagine walking away. This had become my life, my purpose, protecting the team, preventing another infiltration, maintaining our security. It was exhausting and thankless, but necessary. Someone had to stay vigilant, had to remember the brutal lessons we'd learned through painful, repeated experience. The venture capital deal eventually fell through. The investors, unwilling to accept our extreme security requirements, walked away. Management was disappointed, but understood. We'd survived without external funding before. We could do it again. The important thing, they said, was maintaining control, keeping our innovations safe from those who would steal them. As I prepared to leave that night, I performed my usual security check. Desk locked, Computer powered down. Documents secured. I nodded to the security guard on my way out, noting his position and demeanor. The parking garage was well lit, cameras covering every angle. My car had been equipped with additional locks and an alarm system that would wake the entire neighborhood. Driving home, I checked my mirrors constantly, taking a different route than the night before. The habits had become automatic, integrated into every aspect of my life. I lived in a state of perpetual readiness, always expecting the next attack, the next betrayal. It was no way to live, I knew that. But it was the only way I knew how to protect what mattered. The war against corporate espionage had changed us all, transforming a team of creative developers into a paranoid security force. We'd won battles, yes, but at tremendous cost. The enemy remained faceless, persistent, always probing for new weaknesses. And we remained vigilant, trapped in a cycle of suspicion and protection that showed no signs of ending. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats to assess and counter. The security briefings would continue. The monitoring would intensify, and the paranoia would deepen. But we would endure, because the alternative was unthinkable. We'd learned the hard way that trust was a luxury we could no longer afford. The next morning brought an unexpected, jarring development. Our CEO called an all-hands meeting, something that hadn't happened since Eric's arrest. I arrived early, choosing a seat near the exit out of sheer habit, watching the conference room fill with nervous energy, whispering theories about layoffs or restructuring. Instead, the CEO announced a complete overhaul of our security protocols. And then, a new head of security stood beside him, a woman named Patricia, who'd previously worked for a major bank. She outlined changes that made our current measures look utterly amateur. Every employee would undergo monthly polygraph tests. Our computers would be replaced with custom-built machines running proprietary operating systems. The office would be redesigned to eliminate blind spots and create natural surveillance zones. But the most controversial change involved mandatory psychological evaluations. Anyone flagging certain markers, sudden lifestyle changes, unexplained absences, unusual interest in projects outside their department, would be placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. I recognized the profile they were building. It would have caught Derek, Eric, Victoria. Patricia scheduled individual meetings with everyone who'd been involved in the previous incidents. Mine lasted 3 hours. She dissected every decision I'd made, every suspicion I'd acted on, every piece of evidence I collected. Her questions were precise, relentless, probing for weaknesses in our current defenses. I found myself respecting her terrifying thoroughness, while simultaneously resenting the invasive interrogation. Robert's meeting ran even longer. He emerged, looking completely drained, explaining that Patricia had identified 17 vulnerabilities in our network security. She'd given him 2 weeks to patch them or face replacement. The threat wasn't subtle. Perform, or be eliminated. The company, she made clear, couldn't afford weak links anymore. The polygraph tests began immediately. We were asked about outside contacts, financial pressures, and our loyalty to the company. The questions grew increasingly invasive. Had we ever considered selling company information? Did we have gambling debts? Were we satisfied with our compensation? The cold machine measured our responses while Patricia watched, her eyes calculating. 3 employees failed their initial tests. 2 were cleared after follow-up investigations revealed it was just severe test anxiety rather than deception. But the third, a back-end developer named Marcus, couldn't explain certain inconsistencies. Security escorted him out. Patricia's team audited every line of code he'd touched. They found nothing suspicious. But Marcus wasn't invited back. The message was chillingly clear. Doubt meant dismissal. The office renovation began the following week. Walls came down, replaced by stark, unsettling glass partitions that offered no privacy. Cameras appeared in previously hidden corners. Motion sensors tracked our every movement. The break room was redesigned with multiple sight lines, making it impossible to tamper with anything unobserved. Even the bathrooms had cameras monitoring the entrances. Our new computers arrived in armored trucks. Each machine was sealed, with any attempt to open the case triggering immediate data destruction. The operating system was unlike anything I'd ever seen, with security features that bordered on paranoid. Every keystroke was logged. Every file access required biometric confirmation. The system even analyzed our typing patterns, flagging any deviation that might indicate a different user. Patricia instituted surprise drills. Alarms would sound, and we'd have 30 seconds to lock our workstations and assume defensive positions. Security would then attempt to breach our defenses, testing our responses. Anyone who failed faced mandatory retraining. The drills happened at random, unpredictable times, keeping everyone perpetually on edge, constantly stressed. The psychological evaluations were even worse than the polygraphs. A team of therapists probed our mental states, looking for any sign of stress that might make us vulnerable to recruitment. They asked about our families, our finances, our frustrations with the company. Every answer was analyzed for potential risk factors. Several employees were prescribed mandatory counseling to address identified vulnerabilities. I found myself in a strange, unsettling position. My paranoia, once seen as excessive, was now the absolute standard. Patricia consulted me regularly, valuing my experience with infiltrators. She had me review security footage, looking for patterns others might miss. I became her unofficial advisor on human behavior, teaching her team the subtle signs I'd learned to recognize. The work itself suffered under this new regime. Creativity requires freedom, but we were operating in a literal surveillance state. Developers struggled to concentrate with cameras recording their every movement. The collaborative spirit that had driven our innovations was replaced by suspicion and isolation. Productivity metrics showed a steady, undeniable decline. But Patricia argued fiercely that security trumped efficiency. Robert adapted better than most. He actually thrived in the new environment. His paranoia, once seen as a quirk, was finally validated and resourced. Patricia gave him a team of security specialists and an unlimited budget for defensive measures. He implemented systems that would have seemed like science fiction months earlier. Our network became a fortress, impenetrable, but also increasingly difficult, maddeningly difficult, to work within. The first real test of Patricia's system came when a new contractor was hired for a 3-month project. Patricia's team had vetted him extensively, but I noticed familiar behaviors. He asked too many questions, showed too much interest in unrelated projects, always positioned himself to overhear conversations. I reported my suspicions, triggering an immediate investigation that revealed he was exactly what he claimed. An overeager contractor trying to impress for a permanent position. The false alarm had consequences. The contractor was released, despite doing nothing wrong. Word spread in the tech community that our company had become impossible to work with. Recruitment became nearly impossible as qualified candidates chose competitors with less oppressive environments. Our reputation shifted from innovative leader to paranoid pariah. Patricia remained unmoved by the criticism. She implemented even stricter measures after the contractor incident. Background checks now included childhood friends and elementary school teachers. Financial audits examined every transaction for the past decade. Social media histories were analyzed by algorithms, looking for any connection to previous infiltrators or their associates. The breaking point came during a code review session. One of our senior developers, utterly frustrated by constant interruptions for security checks, made a sarcastic comment about feeling like a prisoner. Within minutes, security appeared to escort him for an emergency evaluation. He returned an hour later, shaken and silent. His resignation appeared on my desk the very next morning. The exodus accelerated after that. Talented developers left for companies that still valued creativity over control. Our team shrank from 30 to 12 in 2 months. Those who remained were either too paranoid to trust anywhere else or too invested to start over. We became a skeleton crew, just barely maintaining systems built by people who'd fled. Patricia's response was to hire military veterans with security clearances. They could follow protocols, but they lacked the innovative thinking that had made our company successful. Projects stalled as we struggled to explain complex algorithms to people more comfortable with weapons than code. The very talent that had made us a target was being systematically eliminated. I watched Robert change during this period. His initial enthusiasm for unlimited security resources gave way to a deep, bitter frustration as he realized the true cost. His team could prevent any infiltration, yes, but there was nothing left worth stealing. Our revolutionary algorithms remained secure, trapped in systems so complex that even we struggled to access them. We'd won the war by destroying what we'd fought so desperately to protect. Late one night, while reviewing security footage for Patricia, I noticed something odd. A janitor had spent extra time in the executive conference room, but not in a suspicious way. He was carefully cleaning, taking genuine pride in his work. And that's when it hit me, with the force of a punch. I'd been trained to see threats everywhere, to interpret any deviation as danger. The thought exhausted me in ways the actual infiltrations never had. Patricia scheduled another round of polygraphs after 2 employees were caught discussing their frustrations in the parking garage. The questions had evolved. Now, they probed for any doubt about the security measures themselves. Were we fully committed to the protocols? Did we understand the necessity of each restriction? The machine measured our loyalty, not just to the company, but to the surveillance state we'd created. The irony was not lost on me. It was a cruel, twisted joke. We'd become what we'd fought against. Derek and Eric had invaded our privacy, stolen our thoughts, manipulated our trust. And now, we did it to ourselves. Voluntarily submitting to constant monitoring, surrendering privacy for the promise of security. The infiltrators had won, by forcing us to infiltrate ourselves. A message from Sandra arrived through personal email, carefully worded to avoid triggering any security algorithms. She'd found peace at her nonprofit, working on education software for underprivileged children. The pay was lower, the technology less cutting edge, but she could think freely, create without fear. She invited me to lunch, gently suggesting I might be happier elsewhere. I declined, but the invitation haunted me. Leaving felt like abandoning my post, betraying the vigilance that had saved us multiple times. But staying meant accepting a life of perpetual surveillance, of seeing threats in every shadow, of sacrificing creativity for security. The choice paralyzed me, keeping me trapped in a prison of my own making. Patricia announced new protocols after discovering an employee had used a personal laptop to work from home. All personal devices would be banned from the building. Company phones would be issued, with tracking enabled. Our lives outside work became subject to scrutiny. Any deviation potentially suspicious. The boundary between professional and personal dissolved entirely. Robert finally reached his limit when Patricia suggested installing cameras in our homes to ensure secure work environments. He pushed back, arguing the legal and ethical implications. Their confrontation in the conference room was visible through the glass walls. 2 paranoid minds clashing over the very definition of reasonable security. Robert lost, his objections overruled by executives too fearful, too traumatized, to say no to Patricia. The home installations began voluntarily, with bonuses offered to early adopters. I refused, clinging to some final, desperate boundary between work and life. Patricia noted my resistance in my file, scheduling additional evaluations to understand my reluctance. The sessions probed why I valued privacy when I had nothing to hide, why I resisted measures that would keep everyone safe. Our latest project launch failed spectacularly. The security protocols made collaboration with external partners impossible. Every communication required multiple approvals. Code sharing involved Byzantine procedures that frustrated even the most patient clients. The revolutionary algorithms we protected so carefully became worthless. Trapped in systems too secure for practical use. Management finally questioned Patricia's approach when quarterly revenues showed a dramatic decline. She defended every single measure with examples of prevented infiltrations, though most, by then, were false alarms. Like the eager contractor, the board faced a stark choice: profitability or paranoia. The debate raged for weeks while we continued operating in our surveillance bubble. I made my decision after a particularly invasive polygraph session. The questions had become psychological torture, probing for thoughts I might not even recognize. The operator asked if I'd ever imagined what I could do with our algorithms if I left the company. The question assumed criminal intent in normal career planning. I passed the test, but I felt something break inside me. That evening, I drafted my resignation. 2 sentences. Nothing that could trigger security concerns. I'd served my time, protected what needed protecting, but the cost had become too high. The paranoia that had saved us was now destroying us, and I couldn't watch anymore. I printed it on the secure printer, placed it in an envelope, and left it on my manager's desk. The next morning, I arrived with an unusual, profound calm. I packed my personal items under camera surveillance, said goodbye to Robert, and the few remaining original team members. Patricia scheduled an exit interview, of course, but I declined, knowing it would just be another interrogation. Security escorted me out. Standard procedure for departing employees with sensitive knowledge. Standing in the parking lot, the sun warm on my face, I felt the crushing weight of constant vigilance finally lift. The sun seemed brighter, the air tasted cleaner, without the filter of paranoia. My phone buzzed with a message from Sandra. "Welcome to freedom," it read. I sat in my car for a long moment, processing the strange, bittersweet mix of relief and guilt. Then I drove away, checking my mirrors, still, out of habit, but knowing nothing followed, except my own shadows. 3 months later, the company announced Patricia's departure and a rebalancing of security priorities. Robert had survived. He was leading a more reasonable approach, finding that elusive balance. Some former employees even returned, drawn by promises of creative freedom. The algorithms we'd protected so fiercely finally saw practical application, generating the revenue everyone had hoped for. The balance between security and innovation slowly stabilized. I found work at a small startup. Basic security, tremendous trust. The adjustment took time, a lot of time. Learning to collaborate without suspicion, to share ideas without fear. Sometimes, I'd still catch myself checking for hidden cameras or analyzing a coworker's behavior. But those moments grew rarer. As normal life, finally, reasserted itself. The war, for me, was over.